complementary currency for the Caribbean. I am Francola John from the Seafood Engagement Specialist. My role here this morning is to give some housekeeping rules before the program starts. To interact with our speakers this morning, kindly use the options available in your Zoom panel, generally located at the base of the Zoom window. To comment on the session and share your thoughts, we ask that you use the chat where you can speak with other attendees. As the webinar progresses, we ask that any questions you may have be placed in the question and answer section for ease of locating. Questions there will be posed by professionals and be on topic and adhere to the code of conduct for the event that we host. Thank you for your patience, and I now hand over to our first presenter, Mr. Gary Kalu, Director of Business Development and Implementation Support at the CTU, to start this morning's webinar. Mr. Kalu.
Thank you, Francola. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all participants joining us from the Caribbean and around the globe. I was told and I saw in the registrant that we do have registrants from the Philippines and Australia, Europe, Canada, and the US. So it is my pleasure this morning to welcome you and thank you for joining us in this webinar on exploring the potential of complementary currency for the Caribbean. And special thanks for those joining us in different time zones. We know difficulty and we do appreciate your commitment. The CTU is pleased to be hosting this event in collaboration with one of our private sector members, CARICOM, and I must emphasize that the CTU would not be in support of this initiative if we felt that it was not of value or benefit to the region, and of course in alignment with the CTU's own mandate of establishing a digitally transformed region that fosters economic growth and development. But we do recognize that there are challenges, and this is not an easy task, it's a complex one. And there are some considerations that must be taken into account. We have legal issues, security, governance, and the whole idea of the CSME as well. So in implementing this currency, and hence the reason for having this session here, to hear from Carib Coin on the benefits and challenges and how they intend to roll out this currency and some of the activities and the planned activities, and also to hear from our international experts who have experience in delivering this currency across the world as well. The Caribbean is not unique. This implemented this, and we can take that experience and tailor it to our own unique circumstances in the region. So we do encourage participation. We invite and encourage you to for the next 2 hours or so to actively participate in the webinar, to ask questions, to challenge some of the assumptions and contribute your expertise and ideas. Of course, the success of this initiative hinges on our collective efforts and to shape and refine as needed the concept presented by CARICOM for this new complementary currency, and to get one that best suits the needs and aspirations of Caribbean people. So without further ado, I know Francola would have presented some of the engagements, how to participate and how to interact. And without further ado, I know we have just over 140, it's about 150 by now, participants. So we want to be able to manage that interaction between you and our speakers. And we ask that you follow the housekeeping rules that have been identified thus far. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our media address that is being presented by Dr. Leander Winwall, is a researcher and consultant on complementary currencies from Germany. And I can just, before he comes on, I'll give you some background on okay, so a technical glitch there. So Dr. Winball is an expert in complementary currency. He holds a PhD in economics from the University of Lancaster. From 2012 to 2015, he managed the international EU Interreg program on community currencies in action for the new economics foundation as the NEF in London. The program aimed to enhance the research and practice across the fast developing field of socioeconomic tools, supporting the dissemination and innovation of currency solutions in the public and third sector across Europe, develop an evaluation framework for the socioeconomic impact of currencies, innovation, and provide support and training for existing and new currency initiatives. He also holds a master's degree in neurobiology and a master's in arts in philosophy and business, both from University of Freiburg in Germany. He has lived in all 5 corners of the globe and worked as a freelance consultant in many European countries, Asia, the Americas, and focusing on participatory processes, monetary education, and currency design. So he is well equipped to speak to this issue of complementary currency, and I will now invite Dr. Binwal to make his presentation.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me and inviting me to this. Very excited for this very well organized project and this event to raise the profile of it and introduce it to such a large audience. Please feel free to interrupt me if the sound goes or if the image quality is too bad, or if I'm running over time, please interrupt. In that case, I really hate to take the other speaker's time. I'm now sharing my presentation. Please, somebody let me know when you can see it. Is that on?
Yes, it's good.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about, well, complementary currencies in general, but separating it into theory and practice. And unfortunately, one still cannot talk about complementary currencies without first raising the issue of money in general. And this is what I've also done in my PhD, triggered by so many issues in the implementation of complementary currencies that had to do with the common understanding of these things, legal and compliance concerns of people, basically asking, is this legal? Isn't only the state allowed to issue money? But these questions also came from central banks and from regulators asking in reverse, what are these complementary currencies? What are they doing? What do they try to achieve? So first of all, looking at money, what money is, what the official positions are, and what I call the collective blind spot we all have around money is the first part of this presentation. And then I'm in the second half of that first part, I'm going to introduce my own more coherent framing around these words, money and currency. So a bit of terminology just to set us off and give us a common understanding of these words we're going to be using so much in the future in this process. And the second part is then more on complementary currencies in particular. There again, we have to come from a bit of a broader spectrum on monetary innovation and have a look at what other innovations there are that relate to complementary currencies. And then we're going to have a look at complementary currencies, their potential, their purpose, and look at a few examples at the end of that. And the third part, if we have time enough for that, we'll just be looking at what lessons these elements of currency design might mean for the project CARICOM. So to start us off with, I just need to change something in my settings here so I can see my own slides. To start us off with, we're looking at what money is, that word. And here I'm quoting the Bank of England, a paper in 2014. That's when I lived and worked in London. And it was quite a revelation to have the Bank of England publish something about money, which is a surprise, but was long overdue. And more surprising was that in this paper, they said, despite its important and widespread use, nobody actually knows what money is. And you can look that up in the letters in black are the references, and I hear the presentation will be available later, so you can look that up. So might come as a bit of a surprise that an institution like a central bank doesn't actually have a coherent, precise definition of money, and has to admit that they're all flying a bit blind. And there's a lot of practice around it. Of course, it has been useful for us for many hundreds and thousands of years, but still there's no good explanation where economists are concerned. And often in the literature, then see economists saying, yes, we might have a bit of a wobbly definition, but the legal profession knows. So I spent part of my PhD actually looking at the laws in the US. And this is a quote from a colleague from the UK who did the same kind of critical analysis of the wording in the laws of the UK. So for those two countries, at least, I can be sure with what comes next. And I think because the Anglo-Saxon world is so dominant in the world economics affairs, it might probably be the same for all other countries. And my colleague there basically found money in the law is difficult to define. So there is no clear definition there either. It can encompass every common meaning, or it may equate to none. So even when you look at definitions of money in the laws of the US, that's what I did, there are some definitions, but if you look at the next definition, at the next legal text, they are actually conflicting, contradictory. They don't make sense in the end. Something like the money transmitter law, for example, if you actually read it word by word, it would have to be called something like the anything but money transmitter law, which also doesn't make much sense in the end. So if that is the case, that economists and the legal profession doesn't really have a good definition of money, most people in my field line of work then turn to philosophers. So here's something that the philosopher John Searle often uses when he describes institutions, social institutions, in the philosophical, sociological sense, not in the sense as an institution is an organization. Of course, colloquially, we say a central bank is an institution, and we see a building with columns and a vault. But as a social institution, it's much more philosophical and intangible. But when John Searle talks about institutions, he uses three examples of them. One is money. So he says money is a social institution. It's basically a set of rules that we all agree to play by, just as a government is a social institution, and it comes with certain rules and regulations, and we have an election, and these people have certain mandates. And this third example that he often uses for the same kind of thing, if you want to call it that, is baseball. These are his favorite three. And baseball as a social institution is much more easier to understand that, yes, it has rules and they've been around for a long time and they're relatively rigid, and you have to play by the rules if you want to be part of that game. But of course, there's many varieties of it, and you can play cricket if you live in the UK, or you can play softball, you play something completely different with your friends in your garden if you so desire. So social institutions are, of course, man-made. They're not a given, they're not natural law, and you can adopt the rules if you have a group of people around you that want to play by different rules with you. And if you now look at money as the definition of money in this sense, I find it quite interesting or useful to then say, okay, money is a social institution, and it's basically an idea in practice. So an idea that somebody had that you found others to agree with, but it is just that, it's a broad concept, an idea, and it can then come in many different shapes and forms. So if you Google for the idea of chair, you will see something like this on your screen. So there's many different if you like, they share a common purpose, something to sit on, yes, but sitting is also done in many different situations and with different purposes, so there's just as many chairs. If you now Google for the social institution of money and go image search, you get this on your screen, which is very different from the image of the chair. There is basically only one idea of money out there, and I use Google as approximation of what we all have in our heads, because that is what Google caters to and what Google sources its information from. So if we hear the word money, Google shows us that we're mostly only thinking about US dollars. So this is what I call our collective blind spot, that we have reduced the meaning of the word money to mean that one thing that we have in our wallets. And of course, there's loads more to say about this, how these dollar bills are not actually representative of most of the money we use in everyday practices, like the electronic currencies issued by private banks or central bank digital currencies if they once exist. But basically, for most people in most situations, money equates to a dollar bill or even a gold coin. That is the next very iconic image that we have with this. And that, of course, is a problem if you want to change money and make it different, because then the word money is already occupied by this one very specific meaning. And unless it's a dollar, then it can't be real, it can't be money, it must be somehow even illegal or something. That is what many people in my field had to argue against. So I came up with this different definition of the words money and, as you're going to see, currency. So if you have the big green square there, that to me is the concept of money. That's a set taken from mathematical set theory. And the smaller set inside that is currencies as instantiations of that idea of money. So if I say money, I always mean this very broad idea. And of course, there can be no monopoly and there can be no right and wrong with an idea. But if you then implement this idea into a currency, for example, the US dollar or the euro or cash or digital currencies, then you talk about currencies as one specific implementation or instantiation of that concept. And of course, then under this set of currencies, there can be many different subsets. And they can be randomly assigned. Everybody can have his own picture there. For example, we can have one subset where you find all the conventional currencies. So the US dollar, the pound sterling, the euro, they are currencies. But then, of course, there's other subsets, other labels that will fit there. So the cryptocurrency space is, of course, also just currencies as any other. And at the bottom, there's some words of what we call community currencies in Europe. So a set of complementary currencies that are very specifically geared to often non-profit or local and regional development purposes, so much closer to social purposes than conventional money. But in this purple bubble of money, so to say, all these currencies are the same. And then it wouldn't even make sense anymore to talk about complementary currencies because they are just an instantiation of the concept of money as any other. But if you want to have a definition of a complementary currency, there's actually nothing else or better to say than any currency that is not a conventional currency. So let's have a look at these complementary currencies that are not US dollar or pound sterling or the euro or something like that. And in a normal webinar setting, I would now ask you, the audience, what is wrong with this picture that I'm showing here? Of course, these are all complementary currencies, that is correct, but it's a bit misleading to show paper. Most complementary currencies are digital. Even in the 80s, most of the complementary currencies were already digital, but of course, that's much harder to talk about and to show. And as a recap, moving into this complementary currency part now, we're just going to look at the definitions of money and currency that are just introduced. Money, the concept; currency, the instantiation of that concept. And if you need a better definition or a clearer definition to work with one, then both can be defined as a system of transferable units that facilitate collaboration in a community. And that, of course, is a very broad definition of money, but at least it makes sense and it's coherent. And it asks certain questions like what then can be changed, or how many different kind of implementations of that idea of currency can be there. And by this formulation of this definition, it's kind of obvious that you can have as many currencies as there are different purposes. Like this facilitation of collaboration is, of course, very broad and open. You always have to ask, what kind of collaboration do you want to facilitate? And for which community, for which users are you actually issuing that currency? And then following up questions can be, how do you actually incentivize those users to play along with you and use your currency? And that then is the field of currency design that I will talk to later. But just to be sure that we really are orientated in this space, I just want to give a little broader overview of this field of monetary innovation, which of course then encompasses something to do with money and something to do with currencies. And I normally separate those out in financial innovation and currency innovation, and I'm often talking about a scale of practices. So it's not a clear-cut thing that one project is a currency and the other project is a payment system, but it's kind of a fluid thing. And sometimes, at least with payments and the issuance of currency, you have to do both at the same time, because often you can't use the rails or the piping of another currency. So you're often on this scale somewhere. On the far left, when it comes to financial innovation, there's a lot of interesting things going on there in terms of new investment products. FinTech is a brand name, so to say, to describe a lot of practices and innovation in the field. But for now, we kind of want to look at the right-hand side of this thing, where it actually is about issuing new currencies and different forms of these currencies. So now I'll just take the magnifying glass away again. Now you see words like complementary currency and community currency. Again, those are basically just labels, but complementary currency, as I said earlier, is any currency that is not a conventional one. Community currency then could be seen as a smaller subset, again, that is often away from commercial purposes. It has smaller communities, is really close to the people and governed by the users, so to say. But those are just trying to put all the words that you might encounter out there into a coherent scale to orientate you. Now, if we look at currency issuance, I said that earlier, then there are key design elements in there that you want to have a look at. So as again, there's the sentence that I used as a definition: units that facilitate collaboration in a community. So as I said before, of course, you have to ask, what purpose is that collaboration all about? Do you have a currency for local and regional development? Do you have a currency that provides cheaper credit to SMEs? Do you have a currency that has clear environmental purposes, so should incentivize sustainable behavior, or actually reward you in a certain way for your sustainable behavior? Or is it a currency that is really, well, has political even objectives, and there's enough out there that do this, not least of which, in a way, Bitcoin, that everybody probably has heard of. So as many different purposes there are, and if you think you can further your purpose with issuing a currency, then you will also realize how many different currencies there could be and how they're all different from each other. That basically is one thing. With all the labels you'll encounter: local currency, regional currency, cryptocurrency. I always say there is actually no two currencies that are the same. Every instantiation, even if it's a copycat of the other, will be different because it's used by different people. It's issued by a different entity. Even if they have the legal structure as the other, they will all be quite different. And that also brings us into the other important design element, and that is the issuer must be adequate to your purpose. Of course, you can't have a top-down currency if you want to facilitate community coherence, or you can't have a very exploitative unit system or something that references the output of CO2 if you want to have a sustainable currency or an environmental friendly currency. If you want to really have community collaboration, maybe think about a cooperative issuance structure. And the issuance here, again, there's many things to be said about this. It's not just the person who prints the money, because as I said before, printing money is not what's happening out there for most currencies. A much more diverse set of actually and the rules around how it's what values are inscribed into the currency, so what values they actually play on, and how these units then get into circulation and to whom they get into circulation first. That is all to do with the issuing of a currency. And there's a lot to be said about this, but in the brevity here, we just move on to the last and for me very important element, and that is what shared values does this currency actually express. There's, of course, it's nice in the English language and in many others that the words values and value are so close to each other, but in our minds often so separate, where value normally often refers to monetary value, economic value, which is somehow always assigned a dollar symbol somewhere. Human values and general values are, of course, much more diverse. You can have something like equality, solidarity, even beauty or sustainability as values that a group of people might agree on they want to further. And so sometimes issuing a currency really begs the question of what is the correct unit of account even to your currencies. And there's many different answers to that. And the arbitrary units we currently and commonly use, like the US dollar, is really just one answer to that. And of course, we know there have been currencies that where the value is somehow linked to a material like gold as a backing for currencies, but there's many currencies out there and many more proposals that, for example, use an energy unit like the kilowatt hour as the unit of account that it makes most sense for their currency. Or there's currencies out there where the hour time is the unit of account. So again, when it comes to these shared values and the units of account, it's a broad field and there's many ways to design a currency appropriately for the purpose of your community. I have already mentioned a few examples. I just want to go through a few headlining illustrations, if you like. So here's 4 logos, basically, of 4 very different currencies, just to illustrate how these different design elements are used in practice. So on the top left, this is a picture of a 10-pound note of the Brixton pound. It's a neighborhood in London where the idea of a local currency was very prominently put into practice. They had these beautiful banknotes, and that, of course, not of course, but this currency was backed by pound sterling. So you exchange pound sterling, you got your Brixton pounds back, which of course to an economist often doesn't make any sense. It's still the same thing to them. But even the Bank of England recognized that as an important step to foster the local identity of this neighborhood, which had a bit of a bad reputation previously. Now, as they say, gentrified, it's very hip and people love to be there and live there. But the Brixton pound really played on this sense of identity that they wanted to raise the profile of in Brixton. And yeah, there's many examples of these local currencies or regional currencies across Europe. There's about 80 in France, a little less in Spain. There has been a huge wave of these in Germany, where the Chiemgauer in southern Germany is the most known one, which is really all there more about the economic development of the region and around the Chiemsee in Bavaria. And this currency really just means once you exchange your euros or your pound sterling forward and have the local currency in your hand, you can only use it with the businesses and entrepreneurs inside the region. So the money doesn't flow out again. There's been a lot of work about the leaky bucket and local substitution from the New Economics Foundation, if you want to look that up. So in a more direct sense, region development is often linked with these currencies that just tie in the value in a certain region because they can't be used outside. Below there, where it says Dane County Time Bank, that is just one example I worked with in Madison, Wisconsin in the US, and there's thousands of time banks everywhere in the world. And this is one of these examples where the purpose of the currency, help between people, fostering a sense of community, neighbors helping neighbors is their slogan, informs what kind of unit of account they're using. And that again changes the whole dynamic of the transaction there. So in a time bank, typically the hour is the unit of account. If you do a service for somebody, they pay you an hour. You will be granted an hour on your account. And with this hour on your account, you can go out and get somebody else to render a service to you. Now, because it's an hour, everybody's time is the same. There's no pricing. Nobody earns more than the other because they're higher qualified or have a monopoly or a scarce position in the community. A dentist would be paid the same as somebody mowing your lawn or sitting your children for you. And that is because everybody only has 24 hours in a day, and a currency that has a shared value, equality and solidarity. Of course, for them, it makes sense. Of course, it doesn't make sense to a lawyer who wants to earn more than somebody mowing a lawn, but as every complementary currency, this is a voluntary currency, and you only use it if it makes sense, if it speaks to your own values, and if you're brought into the idea of it because it makes sense to you, if you benefit in one way or another. So all the lawyers that I know, well, all the lawyers that participate in these currencies do part of their work for hours because they want to contribute to their neighborhood and to their local community, and then it makes sense for them to use that. And complementary also means you never only work with these complementary currencies. There's always the conventional currencies to do other things with. So most time banks don't allow even for the purchase of material goods because you can't measure them in time. It's only about services. So for material goods, you would use the US dollar. And if you want to offer a cake on a market that is organized by the time bank, a piece of cake would cost the part of the labor that went into, so maybe it costs 10 minutes or 0.something hours, and you pay maybe $1 on top for the materials that were gone into the cake. Now going counterclockwise to the bottom left, Qui Pago Sardex. Sardex is the name of a business-to-business currency on the island of Sardinia in Italy, where it was after the financial crash of 2007-8, really about invigorating the local entrepreneurship again and having local businesses providing employment, even though with the ensuing euro crisis, Italy was in a really bad place and there was a high unemployment rate, particularly on islands like Sardinia. And with SADEX, they managed to provide free credit to local businesses because it's linked with the euro. They only have the unit of account as a euro, but you can never exchange a SADEX for a euro. So you don't have to play by the normal banking rules, and you can just issue credit that can again be only used on the island. But it being a pretty big island, if most or many of the businesses there participate, it's good as a euro to these people participating. And this model has now been replicated all over Italy, but sort of social currency projects get a lot of media attention, and of course crypto and Bitcoin, to which we'll come in a minute. There has always been a business-to-business currency sector, so basically currency as a service issued by businesses for networks of other businesses to help them with credit plight and providing a different way of selling their goods and services and selling their spare capacity to the business network around them. And if you, for example, in the US, if you look at the International Reciprocal Trade Association, IRTA, you can see hundreds of members all around the world that are actually businesses issuing a currency as a product to other businesses to help them sell their capacity. And just to mention this fourth example here, Bitcoin, in case you wondered, yes, to me, that is also a complementary currency. It's in the same playing field, but with Bitcoin, it's a bit more complicated and tricky to ask this question. Who is it by? Who's it for? What is it actually good for? But it's very important to keep asking these questions. And if there is not a good answer, maybe it's also not a very good currency. If they keep talking about the technological advances, you also always have to ask, what is that technology actually good for, and why would you use that, and what is it actually providing anybody? Why couldn't a different technology do the same if applied by an adequate issuer to a community to which he really caters? So I'm just putting that out there to enable you to ask these questions with the next currencies you encounter. And of course, the one that it's all about here is the CARICOM. So let's just have a look at these design elements and just find a few tentative answers or general directions for what these elements might mean for CARICOM. So if you look at the adequate issuer, of course, corporate governance is very important to ensure trust. It's probably in a project like this very important to have many different stakeholders coming together and actually developing this project together and issuing the currency together, because one will never be able to speak for everybody. And if it's all about regional integration and collaboration, that will also have to be reflected in the governance structure of the project. And we're going to hear from Jan Schröder about that in a minute. The specific purpose really just speaks to cater to your users, find out what they actually want, why the currency will benefit them, what the USP of that currency, and keep designing that you'll also encounter if you Google for the word, that have a very fixed idea of what they want to change in the world, but it's then mostly a problem, a solution, search for a problem. So really starting with the user and trying to find out how they're hampered in their day-to-day transactions and what kind of different currencies could enable them to do more of what they want to do is what I'm often recommending on those terms. And there, the last thing, shared values, again, it's often tempting issuing new currency to go as radical as you can and have these great visions about what the perfect currency would be. But in the field of complementary currency, it never has to be absolutely perfect and the most radical possible. So I always say, be as radical as you need to be. Of course, you need to introduce some novelty, otherwise it's all the same again. But be as simple as possible as well. Your users will have to understand it, they will have to use it, they will also have to communicate to their peers and to their colleagues about it. Otherwise, if it's too complicated or too radical and nobody uses it, it's a non-starter, because these complementary currencies are always voluntary and thus really have to cater to the benefit of their users. And basically that is my last slide, and I thank you very much for your attention, and I hope I left enough time for questions and answers, and I'm looking forward to be part of this conversation in the webinar and beyond. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Pinwall, for that very enlightening presentation, giving us some fundamentals of money and currency, and then tying it back to to Carib. coin and its deployment in the region. We're now going to look into some questions. We open up the floor now for questions from our participants. If you have any questions, you can place it in the question and answer.
Let me, if there are no questions while we wait.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I'll be with you for the rest of the session. So in case there's questions later and it's appropriate for me to come in and answer them, I'll be around.
Thank you. It was a real masterclass in money and currencies. Really very enlightening, very detailed. Of the complementary currencies that you mentioned, I don't remember the one in Germany, but how successful has it been really? And how many years has that been running? I don't know if you mentioned it. If you did, I'm sorry. And yeah, what sort of volume of trade does it facilitate within Germany?
In that region in Germany, it's called the Chiemgau. It's a region in southern Bavaria around a prominent lake. There's only a few millions of volume that they have every year. And that, of course, is only symbolic, if you like. But as the purpose of that currency is raising the regional economy, there's many different avenues to that, if you like. Of course, more turnover for local businesses would be ideal, but a privately issued currency, and they do it actually from a non-profit charity, they of course can only do so much. But in raising the profile and in letting people ask better questions around the economy and money and what the appropriate form of economy would be for the region, it has achieved tremendous success. It's the one currency that kind of disallowed anybody in Germany to ignore this topic of money. Of course, the euro has also been a very large success across Germany, and Germany benefited greatly. But particularly after the financial crisis, a lot of questions around why are we doing it exactly this way? Isn't this risky? What are we losing by this? We're kind of supplemented by the Chiemgauer raising the idea of it could also be different. We could have the whole solidarity, subsidiarity idea of Europe could also be played out in the economic and in the monetary sphere. And we often have to reiterate in Europe that something like the Chiemgau is not about replacing the euro. The euro is great for some things, and yet there's regional development purposes that are more appropriately addressed on a smaller level, and the Chiemgau or something like that could happen there. Of course, across Europe, the idea would then translate. Of course, a country could have a complementary currency that would be called a parallel currency because it's still somehow issued by the state or supported by the state. And just finding the right combination of different levels of currencies would then be the key to conventional economic success as well.
Good, thank you. There is a hand up, Dr. Ali.
Hi, good morning all. Dr. Benwall, great presentation. I love the information you provided thus far. Actually cuts down on my presentation. Thank you very much. Just have a quick question. In relation to your research, have you come across any of the existing complementary currencies that facilitate cross-border trade? Because that creates another complication as well.
Yes, I mean, cross-border can mean national borders, or it could just mean how do local currencies work together. And I guess in the context of CARICOM, it would be across national borders. And there have been a few even very low-key grassroots currencies that enable people to deal with different communities across the world, basically. And again, that is possible because it's so small and so marginal that the regulators don't actually care much about it. And most of these social engagement currencies are often tax excluded. So that's very easy. In Europe, these things are pretty straightforward because at least within the Eurozone, but also the Schengen area and the European Union in general, there is an understanding that cross-border trade is regulated, and it's quite straightforward and easy. And if you do your trades in a complementary currency, you basically declare it in the same way as if it had been a euro transaction. Of course, you can't pay your tax or your customs in the complementary currency, but then it's then done in parallel in the other currency that is appropriate for that. In terms of issuance in Europe, we have a passporting regime, so one currency recognized by regulators in one country in the Eurozone can also then operate in the next country. So there again, it's easy. But of course, I think if you, as your question is aiming towards the implementation across the Caribbean, there will be quite a lot of very intricate issues to be dealt with. I only know that in general, I can say that I haven't encountered a country yet where current legislation prohibits the use of those complementary currencies. Individual currencies sometimes have been outlawed. You can't use that or the other. But in general, if you approach the regulators openly and frankly and explain what you're up to and why it's actually beneficial to your users, there should be a way around all the red tape and the difficulties.
Okay, well, thanks. Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Binwal. We want to move on to our next speaker. And I know there are some questions there. We will get back to them, or we will ask Dr. Binwal to respond to them in the question and answers panel.
Yeah, I'll try to do that.
If we do get our ability to come back to them, we will. Moving on, we would like to now invite Dr. Jan Schroeder, the founder and chief systems architect for CARICOM. Just to give you some background on Dr. Schroeder. Since 1991, he has been highly active in the field of social innovation with a focus on network governance and social impact management. To achieve social and economic sustainable solutions, he always works together with others in networks like the CTU at this point in time. Internationally, he is renowned as architect of a German initiative, Local Alliance for Family, bringing together more than 25,000 institutions in over 700 local stakeholder networks with over 1 billion media contacts. He is involved in leveraging the possibilities of distributed ledger technology, that's blockchain, to scale social impact. He leads an experienced team, bringing Carib dollar, a complementary currency, to the Caribbean. Further, he is a manager of innovation and network management in a consultancy for the health and care sector. One focus of his work is applying AI to the field of societal inclusion, and his credo is cooperation, is structure, content, and attitude in achieving impact together with partners and clients. Together, we can do more with fund and the drive to make the world a better place for people and planet. So let me now introduce Dr. Schroeder.
Many thanks, Mr. Kalu. Many thanks to the CTU for having me here. And many thanks, Dr. Bindewald, for this introduction, which is actually an invitation of creating your currency and optimizing it to your needs. And that's actually what we're doing in proposing Carib dollar. And that's what we're doing today as well. So if there are ideas of making things better, we're open to all this. As you read out, Gary, it's all about collaboration. This is a collaborative effort from the Caribbean for the Caribbean. And I'd like to show you where we are at the moment and try to pull some lines between what we've heard from Leander Bindewald and what we are doing at the moment. So you should be able to see my screen now. So we're trying to embrace the potential of complementary currencies for the Caribbean, and we've heard about a lot of potential there. But the first thing you really need to know is what your users need. What are their needs? What can this complementary currency do? What the existing currencies, be it the national currencies in the Caribbean, or be it the US dollar, which is prevalent all over the Caribbean, cannot do at the moment, due to maybe flaws in the system we're working with. And so that's where we start with. So what actually is the problem, a disconnected Caribbean? And if you look at it from the financial sector, not from the legislative sector or the communication sectors, there are a lot of sectors which contribute to the CSME. I'm just looking at the financial sector here. So one thing is you have this high dependency on the US dollar with a limited supply. Half of the year, there's not enough US dollar in the region to even get hands on it. You have an ever weakening system of correspondent banks due to their de-risking policies. There's no easy access to banking for MSMEs. and many currencies in the Caribbean with low liquidity and exchange pairs are really, some of them aren't even existing. So some of the Caribbean is disconnected, and this makes it really difficult to do cross-border trades. All of this leads to high costs for Caribbean businesses and the slowdown of the economic development. If you look into research, there are reports that say if you would have a Caribbean payment and settlement system, then the trade amount between the region, which is 2.2 billion at the moment, could almost double. So that's actually the problem we have, and that's where we're addressing our key users or businesses, and we're aiming at fostering B2B cross-border trade in the Caribbean. And how do we want to do it? We suggest Carib dollar, a complementary currency for the Caribbean. First of all, it's easy to use digital money because otherwise you would have to carry it across the ocean. It has a stable value to be defined by Caribbean public and private stakeholders. So maybe we begin with one Carib dollar is $1 USD or $1 Barbadian dollar, but this can change by time. You could even say the value changes with an inflation rate you want to implement through this currency. It will be a complementary currency securely backed by Caribbean collateral. This makes it a little bit different, for example, to the biggest currency, complementary currency we have found, which is the Swiss Weir or Veer. They have a turnaround of something like 2 to 3 billion Swiss francs, value of 2 to 3 billion Swiss francs per year. So this is the biggest one we found till now. This is differently backed. We can talk about that in the other place. So ours will be backed by Caribbean collateral, and we'll start with Caribbean national currencies as a backing. So what does this solve? What is the special thing about this complementary currency? First of all, it's complementary. So it lives aside of the national currency, which replaced the national currencies, but it's living aside. It's regional. We build it in the way that Carib dollar liquidity can't leak out of the region like the US dollar does, because you use it to buy for imports from the US. It will stay in the region. It's something made and designed to be transferred between businesses in the region. It works without intermediary, so correspondent banking is not a problem anywhere. Just imagine you have a wallet on your laptop. You just send your Carib dollar to the business where you do trade with somewhere in the Caribbean. This may be between Antigua and Guyana, between Barbados and Jamaica. Say what you think. It's easy accessible through trusted payment service providers. So we rely on existing systems in the business world in the Caribbean, and it will be commonly accepted in all CARICOM member states, and there can always be exchanged against any national currency. So essentially, it makes national currencies liquid, if you want to put it that way. You can exchange into Carib dollar and then do payments with it. And how it works, it's rather simple. And that's exactly what Dr. Bindeveld asked us to make it as radical as necessary. I think we're quite radical because we propose one currency being used all across the Caribbean, but we keep it simple. So how does a businessman, say Bob, do this? So first thing is he sends Caribbean currency to his payment service provider. He then gives this to his custodian who stores this Caribbean currency. This is the collateral we have in VAC. And then CaribCoin issues the Carib dollar. Bob receives Carib dollar in his wallet. And this was the most complicated process he will ever have to deal with when dealing with Carib dollar. Because then he can start to do trading. He can do seamless payments with Carib dollar. He sends his Carib dollar to Alice. Alice receives Carib dollar in her wallet. Clearing and settlement works through technology, and then they can exchange goods and have an easy payment and settlement path to do so. So the major thing is to have trust in such a currency. So what I'd like to point out, CaribCoin Inc. will provide the technical infrastructure and the governance services. But the idea at the end is that we'll have a multi-stakeholder governance by consent with several multinational institutions really deciding what is the value of Carib dollar, how can it be exchanged, in which countries should it be accepted. So all these questions will not be answered just by a private company, but a public-private governance network, all coming from the Caribbean. Is a little bit set up a little bit different from the decision mechanisms we have in CARICOM at the moment, where we're looking at anonymity, which slows things down to some extent. This will be governed by consent. So where are we now? We're preparing our so-called MVP, minimal viable product. We want to transfer Carib dollar between Jamaica and Barbados in this year. So what we're setting up at the moment is the technical infrastructure and the web apps to securely buy, sell, store, and issue and transfer Carib dollar. The issuance infrastructure already works. This we have set up in the last 2 months. We're setting up a governance structure ensuring stability of Carib dollar. Thanks a lot to the CTU, who is willing to help us in here and step in an advisory group to really help setting up Carib dollar in a well-designed manner. We're setting up a 2-tier distribution system relying on existing payment service providers. So if there are payment service providers in the audience, please just approach us. We're building this network just at the moment. We're in negotiations who is really interested in providing this new means of payments to their businesses. We'll have a governmentally approved virtual asset service provider. We're working closely with the regulators now, and a team and service provider network capable of fulfilling everything necessary to make Carib coin and Carib dollar a success. This is a group behind it. First of all, the EBIT group, which is fostering this startup. Carib coin is a startup existing since more than 2 years now. And this is the group of individuals coming from all over the world, but most of them Caribbean-based, who are building this product, who are setting up it in a legally concise manner, who are dealing with everything else needed to set up a complementary currency, really serving the needs of the Caribbean. So our ask to you in the audience, participate in our MVP. We're looking for 10 to 15 businesses in Jamaica and Barbados doing cross-border trade at the moment. We're looking for payment service providers interested in a new product for their customers. And more than that, supranational organizations, business networks, and media is really interested in fostering regional development, like CTU has done it since last year. And I really appreciate the support of yours. It helps us understand the needs of the region. It helps us make this a reliable product for everybody who may use it in the future. So thank you for your interest, and I'm open for any type of questions and joining the panel afterwards.
Good. Thank you very much, Dr. Schroeder, for that presentation. Plans for Carib coin and for enlightening us for benefits as well. There are some questions, so I can read out one of the questions, and it's from Brandon Raj Bashir. And he wants to know, will the Carib dollar delete cash?
I would say no. It's a complementary currency. It exists alongside the national currencies. Carib dollar itself will be only digital because it makes sense. If you send money across thousands of miles, you better do it in a digital manner. But in the day-to-day consumer-oriented business, this is not the place for Carib dollar. There you can still use your cash. So it will live alongside cash in the national currencies, be them CBDCs or be them cash-based.
Okay, so we have another question from Dwayne Eiffel, and he wants to know, how will the Carib dollar work in territories where currency restrictions exist? And give an example of what it is.
So we have to discuss this in details with the regulators. It always depends on what kind of restrictions you have there. Most of them are not as strict when you're dealing with businesses, and I can't give all answers at the moment. We're dealing with that with the regulators. We'll all be in compliant with the existing regulations.
And Deidre Williams wants to know, how much will it cost?
Using it, so the idea.
Sorry,
or
what is it going to cost? Yeah.
So there are two answers to that. So we haven't yet define the value of Carib dollar. This is something we have to define together with the governance authority or advisory group. So most probably we will start with something related to the US dollar. And let's say it could be $1 US, could be $2 USD, could be half a US dollar. We have to decide on that. At the end, it doesn't matter. It's just the value we define. Using it, the ideas at the moment will be that we have essentially transfer fees, something around 2%. That's the idea at the moment, making it quite a cheap means. And so that's our USP. So it's fast, it's cheap, reliable, safe, and it's available across all the Caribbean. These are the USPs we're going for.
Yes, I see no more questions at this point. Please feel free again if you have questions as we go along to place them in the question and answer box, and we will address them as we move along. So we'd like to move on to the next session, and this session is a panel discussion moderated by Ms. Michelle Marius, founder of ICT Pulse, and I will invite Michelle to join us. Michelle, of course, is an experienced consultant, manager, regulator, engineer, and author for the past 20 years with experience in ICT and telecommunications space in the region. She has worked in both the private and the public sectors, and has developed and in developing countries in the Caribbean, South Asia, and Southern Pacific. Currently, Michelle is the director of ICT Pulse Consulting Limited, a research and advisory firm that specializes in a broad range of ICT and telecommunications skills, and is based in Jamaica. She is also the founder of Project Pulse, an online platform that collates tender opportunities from across the Caribbean region. Finally, Michelle is the publisher, editor, and primary contributor of ICT Pulse, as well as a respected and long-standing online publication that discusses topical telecommunication and ICT issues for the Caribbean, from the Caribbean perspective, which has wide readership across the region and internationally. So let me welcome Michelle. Good morning, Michelle, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Gary, for having me. Just checking whether or not you can hear me.
We're hearing you loud and clear.
Okay, great.
Michelle?
Great. Yes, sir.
Yeah, crave your indulgence for a second. We did have, just before you begin the next segment, we did have Dr. Patrick Antoine on, the Director General of the Caribbean Private Sector Organization, and he wanted to make a comment. And I'd like to open the floor to him if he's still there to do that before we just get started with the next segment.
Chair, I'm still very much here, but I think in the interest of the continuity that we have developed, I certainly hold it for later in the question and answer session, but thank you for recognizing us.
Right, and thanks for joining us. Okay, Michelle, over to you.
Okay, thank you again, SG. And thank you everyone for joining us. We have been having quite a bit of a lively chat as the presentations have been delivered. For this point with the discussion, I'd just like to identify the persons who will be participating. So we have Dr. Antonio Allen from the University of the West Indies, Cable campus. He's an economist by training and has worked as an economist with the government of Barbados, among many other hats that he has had in the past. We will also have Mr. Rodney Taylor, the Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, as well as Dr. Jan Schroeder, who we just heard from a moment ago. I'll also just want to have a broken line linked to Dr. Bindawal as well, who has been answering questions in the chat, but he may also be called upon to help us in the conversation as well as I will also rope in Dr. Antoine, who the SG asked to also participate as well. However, to start us off, I'll invite the SG to just probably set a little bit of context for the conversation we're going to have. He can share his thoughts on behalf of the CTU about CARICOM, and then I'll ask Dr. Allen thereafter, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you very much, Michelle. So I'm pleased to also be a part of this webinar today. CARICOM is a private sector member of the CTU. The CTU is a regional intergovernmental organization. So our primary stakeholders are the governments of CARICOM. And of course, we're established to promote ICT-enabled social and economic development. So any way by which we can improve the lives of our citizens through use of and development of information and communication technology, that falls within our mandate. And so we're pleased to support this project. We have been making the rounds on regional media talking about it. As late as last year in June, we held a webinar on cryptocurrencies and demystifying it. And that was also supported by Abed Ventures and CARICOM. The first presentation by Dr. Bindewald made it very clear that the whole issue of money is complex, and currencies complex. It's a social construct, really. But it is an issue that is critical for regional trade. And I'm reliably informed by regional trade experts that intra-CARICOM trade is somewhere around 19% versus the rest of the world, which means that we're trading more with persons outside of the single market and economy more than we are trading with ourselves. Now, the movement of money is not the only issue, of course. How we settle payments for goods and services is not the only issue. There are issues, of course, of economies of scale. If we talk about agriculture and subsidies, for example, in the United States, that would compete. We've all said for many, many decades that Guyana, for example, can feed the entire CARICOM. So why isn't that happening when the land resources are there, when the water resources are there, all the technology there to do that? So there are issues beyond money, but money is certainly one. Cuba is a member state of the CTU. For many years, we've not been using correspondent banks, even though Cuba is very much within the Caribbean. It represents one of the largest markets in the Caribbean. And I know many companies in the Caribbean do business with Cuba, but the settlements and the embargoes and so on presents a huge problem. We want to see, we would love to see the success of this project in particular. It is not unlike what we've been doing in terms of the internet traffic, for example. And if I were to draw even our internet traffic within national boundaries, traversed through the United States before it went to persons that were within the same national borders. So just as that doesn't make sense from a technical and engineering point of view, it doesn't make sense that we're trading within this single space, but we're using complex, heavily regulated, onerous means of settling payments with our neighbors. So from that point of view, I just wanted to set the context that we believe that this technological solution is can address a problem, one of the key problems of doing trade within the region. It is not the only problem, like I said, but we're happy from within our mandate. We see the value of it in driving social and economic development and empowering our business to drive the cost down of doing business. So I'll stop there for now in that context.
Thank you so much, SG. And Dr. Aline, I would love to hear what you have to say. And probably, certainly as an economist and thinking about CSME, which has come through the conversation very lightly, but I think clearly we have so many regional initiatives ongoing, the biggest one being CSME, and trying to deepen the linkages across Caribbean countries, across CARICOM member states. So perhaps let's hear your thoughts, and then certainly we can get more deeply into the potential impact of a complementary currency with respect to CSME.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll be brief. The information that was presented so far has been quite valuable, and I think it paints a clear picture of the level of complexity that exists as it relates to this issue. Now, I do want to support the Secretary General, Taylor, for his comments in relation to the need for such an activity to take place and consideration to be given for payments to be made cheaper to facilitate trade and so on. Now, as it relates to complementary currencies, or any form of additional currency, digital or otherwise, I think the Caribbean has been lagging behind in this effort for a number of years. In 2019-20, I did some collaboration with the IDB in relation to a Caribbean settlement network, which kind of facilitates similar to what we are talking about now. However, the issue still remains. Now, from a theoretical perspective, we can say, well, yes, you eliminate some of the red tape from government, reduce tax issues and so on. And that's from a macroeconomic perspective. And this is all theoretical. It increases trade. Michelle, you mentioned also too the whole notion of increase in integration and so on across the region. Now, this is all good, but I think my task here now, given that all this information has been presented, was to know, given my research, to present some of the more tougher questions, I think, as it relates to these issues. Now, the issue of complementary currencies tend to be more standalone, than, in my opinion, than those of conventional currency. So the reliance on the US dollar now creates some questions in my mind as into the severity of the reliance that we may still require to be placed on the US, which therefore increases our or reduces our independence and reduce the overall cost. Now, having said all this, I'll try to sum this up in basically one scenario. Now, as it relates to anything that challenges the status quo, let's look at it. Now, we will always have, there's a need for key, I identified 3 key things. It would be the facilitation of ease of use, which tends to be possible with this particular currency, digital currency. The transactional cost. Now, as long as we can compete with the additional SWIFT system or existing systems, therefore add some value to the possibility of it. And majorly, I think the major focus will be placed on the strength of the community buy-in. Now, community being the entire region. And if you mentioned the CSME, and if the CSME is anything to take by, this is going to be a long drawn-out process, and we don't want that. We need to find alternate ways. I'm being very blunt. We need to find alternate ways of tackling such an issue. Now, Mr. Shorter, actually, or Dr. Shorter indicated that there are potentials, and there are significant potentials that exist as it relates to digital currency. Having it as a complementary currency, we don't have to challenge any international rules. We don't have to create any worry about the challenges to our local currencies across the board. This would be ideal. However, the practicality of it still remains a challenging task. And I pose the questions to the panel, even though I'm one of the members of the panel, that these things need to be addressed. And we really should address them, because from my previous research, a lot of it comes from majorly the buy-in, and it has to be substantial. When I say, because Dr. Shorty mentioned about 15 or so companies, that's definitely not enough. The Caribbean is way too small to facilitate such an activity, right, with only a handful of businesses. We want businesses in I think one of the largest places, I think it's Dr. Benwall, you mentioned Ithaca, or I saw Ithaca's time money issued as one of your pictures. Now, I think between Ithaca and Germany, I think it is maybe, no, Greece has one of the largest take-ups of businesses. I think like 17% or something like that. Some significant percentage of the businesses in Greece, I think it is, has the buy-in to this particular process. And that's what we want. We want a significant process, or significant portion, sorry, of businesses to be involved in such an activity. Right, and these are some of my key points. Now I'll get into some others later on. I can answer some questions I've asked, but these are some of the key issues I think should be addressed before we even contemplate practicing. Bear in mind, I do want to say one thing, that the current Carib coin needs to be, and for those of you who are aware of the money that existed in Barbados a couple of years ago, it needs to be a step up from that. The process of getting money, it needs to be earned. There needs to be a facility to earn credit or earn income as digital money, as opposed to just taking your money and putting it on a system through some facility to then, because that's a process that nobody wants to do. And those individuals who don't have a banking system and wants to get involved, that creates another problem. So that's my 2 cents thus far. Apologies.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Aline. Actually, just a correction, and I think Dr. Schroeder is going to address it. The 15 businesses that he mentioned is initially for what would be the test of the proof of concept of the Carib dollar. So what he mentioned, the minimum viable product. So he's asking for 15 businesses from across Barbados and Jamaica to help to kick the wheels, see what the system will look like when fully implemented. So basically, it's a proof of concept.
No, I understand that as a pilot approach. However, I think you should go beyond that immediately. Just see who is available, who's interested.
Dr. Schroeder, I mean, is that possible? Because suppose there may be businesses from Trinidad, for example, they have strong links, multinational organizations, especially doing lots of manufacturing and exporting across the region. So perhaps, you know, a country like Trinidad may be also a good candidate to participate in the pilot as well. We're not hearing you.
I think the best way to kill a startup is to put too much on it until the product has been really thoroughly tested. So the way you usually go, you go fast into the market with a small number, you test your product, then you get the basis, you get the proof that this thing really works, and then it gets much easier to attract other ones. I'm completely with you, Dr. Elaine. It's not about 15 business. We have to get traction behind this. That's why I'm happy that Patrick Antoine is here. So that's why we're doing this webinar. We want to have awareness so that as soon as we can show this works, then we're attractive. At the moment, it's an idea. We can build our technology, but we don't have the businesses and the payment service providers already using it. And I think this will make a big step forward. And that's why we're going for a small number in the first step. If this works, and I'm completely sure it will work, the technology is in place already, then we'll have to accelerate growth very fast because this is a network effect business. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. And I think that's an essential thing. That's why I was asking for supranational organizations. That's why we're asking for media. This is something we have to have a collective push to use it, and then it will work.
Thank you. Dr. Hav?
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I came in a listening mode on behalf of the CPSO this morning because we are, of course, extremely interested in the area, particularly in relation to payment solutions across the community. And this is both for goods and services. So,
excuse me a minute. Sorry, what the organization, you just use your abbreviation, but probably can you just spell it out for those of us?
I am so sorry. We always believe it's a household name, but I think sometimes we recognize we're wrong. It's the CARICOM Private Sector Organization.
Okay, great.
Of which I'm the CEO and technical director. We were created just before the pandemic. And the 25 by 25 strategy that the region's working on really was born in the midst of the pandemic, and it came together out of the sort of contributions of many of the businesses that Jan would want to have involved in this, recognizing that we needed to come together to take advantage of the opportunities that existed in agriculture. And I want to announce that it's now moved on to industrial products as well. Yes. Let me say three things. One, clearly we're interested in this because I think it does in fact provide us with an opportunity to solve a problem. But let me tell you the way that I want to look at this is from the perspective of what problem are we trying to solve? And I think we need to be clear on that, because I think one of the ways that we've made errors in the past is that we've tried to use one instrument or one modality to fix too many problems. From our perspective, there is a problem. Our problem is that we have trade being slowed because we don't have the payment mechanisms, for instance, between the OECS and Trinidad. When the trade takes place from Trinidad to the OECS, there isn't a payment problem. But when it takes place from the OECS to Trinidad, there's often a payment problem. And of course, the persons that are most impacted are the persons that deal with agricultural goods. And just by dint of how the sector is organized, we're talking about small producers and small traders. So here's the thing. One of the pilot projects that really I thought we ought to have, and I've said this to the governor of the central bank in the ECCB, is setting up a pilot project that deals with a payment solution, very much like what you're proposing, Jean, between Trinidad and the OECS. And I think there's a big appetite for this because it is in fact one of the inhibitors to intra-regional trade. On the broader front, do I believe that the model that, well, I think that's the only way. One of the problems with the payment solutions that we've tried in the past from a macro perspective, Dr. Aline, is that we tried mechanism to solving these payment problems. It's not going to happen if we leave it up to central banks. In fact, I want to make my third point that the CPSO is now engaged with an initiative where we're trying to create, to put, let me say, momentum behind the CARICOM stock exchange. And I'd like to talk to you, Jean, on that, because I think the same pilot approach, I looked at your presentation in terms of developing these virtual assets, is really going to be very useful for us if we were to take that on too as a pilot project, just under years. So I think the pilot approach is also useful. My question really would be, why Jamaica and Barbados? Outside of there being, of course, legislation and a maturity in financial and asset markets, seems to me as though when we look at what problem we're trying to solve, some of what we just heard about the traders from Trinidad and exporters would in fact raise some eyebrows in terms of why not include what is in fact the country which accounts for 48 to 50% of intra-regional trade in goods and about 45% for intra-regional trade in services. So that really was my question earlier. That's the sort of 4 or 5 points I want to make. My last offer is this. We will invite you to make a presentation to our CPSO executive directors. They are all of the large companies in the region and many, many small ones. But they would include the companies that account for about 70% of intra-regional trade of goods, 70. And yes, Dr. Aline is right. We want to ultimately get everyone involved. But I think we have to start with a smaller number that accounts for a large impact. And I think once we're able to prove concept there, then we are also going to have uptake by a lot of the smaller companies that are more diffuse and a lot more difficult for us to bring into the net. But we would have learned about how to do that by dealing with the smaller with the smaller number of large companies. So my proposals are: one, look at the agricultural trade between the OECS and Trinidad. You may find that the central bank may be prepared to carve out resources just for this problem that needs to be solved and continues to linger. And of course, I've invited you already on behalf of the CPSO, and I'll talk to my colleagues at the CTU to be proper so that they too can be part of that conversation. And I want to thank you for having us this morning. I didn't intend to speak, but economists never give up an opportunity to say something.
Thank you so much, Dr. Antoine. Dr. Schroeder, would you want to just respond? And then I see Dr. Aline has his hand up, and oh, you put your hand down. Okay, no problem.
So definitely, many thanks, Mr. Antoine, for this invitation. I will be happy to present and even discuss what opportunities there are apart from doing it pilot in Barbados and Jamaica. I know about your initiative 25 by 25. I've always thought this could be an ideal step in place for Carib dollar, because that's where regional products are traded. And I think the goals you have are quite a lot in line with the goals we have in Carib dollars. So I'm open to a second pilot, or maybe even change our directions. I can tell you why we chose Barbados and Jamaica, because there's quite an equality in trade. Export and import in both directions, more or less the same value, which makes the MVP a little bit easier. But problems are there to be solved. So happy to join that discussion, and I'm really excited, yeah, to have it quite soon.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Let me take a question that has been in the Q&A section from Sachin Ganpat. We have a single currency in many of the Eastern Caribbean countries in the EC dollar. Why not just have countries not adopt that over the Carib dollar? Dr. Schroeder?
That's a Euro pathway. So taking one currency and spreading it across the whole region. And if you look at what Europe did to abolish all the national currencies and replace them, this was a very, very tedious, arduous way. It was costly. You needed tons of administrative power to do all this. And I think in general, the idea is interesting you're posing there, but it's much easier to implement a complementary currency. And maybe if this whole thing works, we'll talk about other use cases as well. That's the line you're showing, Dr. Aline, as far as I understood. If it really works for cross-border trade, let's see where we can use it as well, but not solve too many problems with one thing. And I think the complementary currency is much easier to introduce than spreading the Eastern Caribbean dollar across the whole Caribbean.
Yes, fair enough. It certainly can be. The word that came to mind as you were talking, Dr. Schroeder, was brutal in terms of trying to get countries to adopt a single currency. So I guess that is certainly something to consider. I think for me, I recognize and I had a mind shift as the presentations were being delivered, because when I initially thought of the complementary currency, I think a big challenge for me was I understand that we are trying to offer something alongside what might be local currencies, but I sort of said, but what's the point? It felt a little bit that we often tend to think in terms of almost like absolutes. We have to win, we have to lose. But I think, though, notwithstanding, just in terms of the cost, operating cost, management cost of something like the Carib coin relative to perhaps what might be the size of the eventual community that will be using it. I mean, have you all worked out to any degree what it might take for the Carib dollar to be viable? What sort of volumes of trade that you need to be seeing?
Sure, we have some calculations. I wouldn't spread them out here because there are lots of assumptions in there in this early stage of the venture. But I think we would be completely happy if 10% of the trade would be done by Carib dollar. This is completely viable and it would be profitable even before that. So this can be done. We don't need to grab 93% of the payments, which would be just illusory. This wouldn't work. So it is viable. And we have done some calculations, but I'd rather talk about numbers if we have done an MVP and we have some volume in there, and then you really know what it costs to set something up like this. The important thing is what Dr. Aline pointed out too. We have to generate network effects. And I think the pathway Patrick Antoine has shown, take regional initiatives like strengthening the agricultural sector and combine them with this financial innovation, with this monetary innovation. I think this gives more power to the regional initiative and gives these network effects you need to introduce such a currency. So we can really combine things and have a win-win situation there.
Great. Dr. Aline, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just have two questions, and it's really to get some insight into some lessons learned from Dr. Benwall. In terms of your research, we know that buy-in is critical. We know that a number of actually complementary currencies has failed as a result of the lack of buy-in and so on. So is there any particular advice you can offer Carib Coin in terms of the development, to ensure the development of its buy-in, in terms of what approach to take in terms of getting individuals accepting? Because as we know, for those in the Caribbean, the take-up of innovation is slow within the region. We may have it present, but it's definitely slow. And as it relates to Dr. Schroeder, yourself, I see you have Ambassador Abed on your board. So therefore, is there any lessons that have been learned as it relates to money in terms of their initial approach to dealing with such a digital coin approach? Those are my two questions.
Yeah, thank you. I was considering to come in earlier because there's also a few questions in the Q&A section that I'm not going to answer as I did before, because they seem to be a bit repetitive, also about gold and silver backing and other currencies in a basket and these things. That to me, there's two paradigms in complementary currency introduction, and one is the Silicon Valley technology approach of build it and they will come kind of thing. You put a platform, a technology out there, you steer the media up, you create a hype, and you hope that somebody will find it useful. Or in some way or form that worked, but for most it didn't. And if you create a currency and you're really looking for user benefit and want to make that something useful, the other way around is probably more interesting or more substantial, and that is what I have heard Jan Schröder describing anyway. Really look where the beneficiaries will be, what the users will be, start working with them, ask the questions, what do you need? What will make this one transaction more swift and quick and cheaper for you, instead of just building a platform from really high financial international ideas and then hope it will somehow apply to the people on the ground. So really the currency that do engage their users from the beginning and actually build something, even just for an individual use case. When somebody asked about viability earlier, of course you have to sustain the issuer and say the company that provides this technology and the platform, and they will have some operating costs that need to be recouped by a certain volume of transaction and the transaction fees associated, or whatever the business model will be. But to me, the currency would already be successful if a single transaction goes through that would otherwise not have happened. If some trade happens, if some sales happens, that otherwise couldn't have happened this way, it's already a success. So really introducing it from a user's perspective, building it up from the ground up in as slow as you basically can. Of course, at some point, there might be burnouts on part of the company as well if it takes too long to get somewhere. And if the volume isn't there to actually support the provision of the platform, that would be detrimental. But otherwise, I don't see the big urge, and have seen too much failure when a too quick and too much focus on growth strategy was deployed in complementary currencies.
Okay, before you run off, just a follow-up question. In your presentation, you mentioned corporate governance being critical. Could you elaborate a little bit on that? Because currently, from what is being proposed, is more of a private entity facilitating this overall process.
Sure. And again, just to contrast this with what we think we know about money. I mean, if you ask the man on the street about money and who makes it, he thinks the government issues it. He has no idea of the already very complex arrangement between private companies, being commercial banks actually issuing the conventional money mostly, and the central banks issuing a little part of the money in terms of cash and central bank currencies. And then they are completely oblivious to the huge private sector that runs most of the payment sector at huge profit. And that is something we all pay, and we all, well, we would all be better off if that was done in whether a public capacity or in a multi-stakeholder capacity, where those beneficiaries and those providers who actually care about the issues would come together and do that together. So having a private initiative is one thing, but including what is then not necessarily shareholders, but stakeholders in terms of central banks that I've heard were invited to this event. I'm not sure how many central bankers are currently in the audience or even on the panel. I'm sorry if I misunderstood or missed some information there, but including those parties, including your users, making them also part of the, as much as you can feasibly, part of the decisioning and governance process is really, well, to me, is the one way forward that is fail safe, unless, of course, it becomes too cumbersome. But looking at the cooperatives legacy around the world, where people have also included all the beneficiaries and their stakeholders in the governance body of a enterprise, has huge benefits over a single entity issuing something and just looking at everybody else as their clients. In a currency, if a currency facilitates something for a community, you also have to include the community in determining how it works, what it is, not only ask them, but include them. And I think what I heard from CARICOM so far was in a good trajectory in that direction.
can't hear you, Michelle. Oh, I can't.
Sorry. Sorry. Thank you so much for responding. Taking a question from the chat, and it is to Dr. Schroeder. Are the regulators in the region involved in these discussions on the introduction of Carib dollar? And if so, what is the thinking on the risk that it presents and how to manage it?
Well, as I told you, we're just preparing the application to be a regulated virtual asset service provider in one of the Caribbean states. And so we have to engage they see, because we learned from that. We learned security policy with an expert working on that. We have to deal with all the risks you have when you're a currency issuer. So looking at not anybody can just mint and issue new Carib dollars. So we have to set up our processes in a safe way so that customers really know this is reliable. This will always be backed. And so these are the things, as far as we know, and as far as we've studied, what the regulators ask us, this is what we have to deal with. It's a complex issue. We're just setting up the whole risk policy. It's tons of not paperwork, but processes you have to put in place. And this we will discuss with the regulators. What I've learned is better not discuss a theoretical construct with regulators. They'll listen to you. We've had that in the beginning of this project. Now we'll approach them with specific risk policies and then discuss these and see where maybe we can be better and what the ideas they have. Because at the end, it's an economical advantage for the Caribbean, and I don't see regulators as institutions who want to prevent things, but they have their view on things. They want to prevent customers to lose their money, which is absolutely necessary that this thing is set up proof, and they have a watch on the economical impact of this as well. And I think they'll see, as everybody else, this has a very positive impact and there's no threat to anybody if done right.
Indeed. I guess execution is everything. But Dr. Aline, I want just your insight, because it's all well and good that the architects of Carib dollar are prepared to engage the regulators in the various countries, ensure that everybody is happy and satisfied with this complementary currency. But I don't know whether or not, and I mean, it's still early days, connecting the dots to actually trade with the currency, for the currency to move from one wallet, for all intents and purposes, in one country to another wallet, whereby the recipient can then convert it to their local currency, and just the issue of the actual movement of that money across the region. I don't know if you have any sort of insights that you might be able to share.
Well, as Dr. Schroeder indicated, this is all experimental at this point. But I would say this, I mean, speaking of the history from the Caribbean Settlement Network, where we actually identified a number of failures due to a more from an administrative perspective as opposed to technical perspective. The facility was there, it was operational. However, it failed not as a result of systems, but as a result of individuals. So this actually leads to a question I was seeking to ask, as in relation to the CTO. I mean, what is your role as it is to bring these parties together to ensure, at this point, to ensure that level of, I dare say, integrity, corporate governance, and corporate alliance in terms of getting these things from the ground up and running? Because it's all well and good to have the technical side. Dr. Schroeder himself can provide, private institution can provide that. However, the connection, the link between that governance and so on needs to be mitigated, or needs to be assured that government's intervention may be minimal, but however, the rules and regulations required, as Dr. Schroeder indicated, must be complementary to what you're trying to achieve, as opposed to be an obstacle. So the agency, I see the CTO as one of those agencies, as probably Dr. Antoine himself, getting the private businesses in, that level, not just buy-in, but that level of corporate cooperation between individuals, because I do have a problem as it relates to the wallet component in terms of me just going to the bank and putting, but outside of that, the transfer of the funds from one country to another, or one community to another, one business to another, needs to be something that is comfortable and easily assured from the powers that be, as well as your neighboring partners.
Does the Caribbean settlement network still exist?
No, it does not. Not to my knowledge.
Mm.
Let's just say governments don't like to pay debts.
All right, well, I'll leave that for another time. SG, I think Dr. Allen may have sort of targeted some thoughts at you.
Yes, yes, sure, absolutely. Thank you. I mentioned that CARICOM is a member of the CTO, as a private sector member. Based on the nature of the product, in that it is technology-based, a technology solution addressing a financial challenge, we are interested in it from that perspective. And so our real mandate is really in technology, as I mentioned, and ICT-enabled development, and how it can impact businesses and citizens within the CARICOM single market and economy, and within the CARICOM single ICT space. CARICOM has asked us, we're in discussions with them to sign an MOU. They have proposed a governance authority. We are in discussions of whether we can be a part of the authority or an advisory group, but certainly we want to lend to trans around this, but we cannot be the only organization we've been talking about. Of course, they need to include central banks, they need to include financial services regulators as well, in some way, shape, or form. What is being proposed is new within this space. It has been done in Europe, and from examples, I think the question was asked whether there was examples of cross-border, as in across the national borders. So this, by all means, is innovation, technological innovation addressing a financial problem, and therefore you need financial regulators. You need people who understand technology. We know that there is a lot of bad press around, and a lot of an association of a complementary currency with a cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency, of course, getting a lot of bad press, rightfully so, within recent times with the fall of FTX and so on. So even that awareness and education, what we're doing here today, talking about this complementary currency, so I'm happy to have stakeholders like the private sector organization here, to have some regulators as well on the call, so that we can have this conversation. We can be a part of the discussion. We can lend some governance, in an advice. I've said before that we can't just keep talking about technology in the region. We have to actually go forward. Sometimes we have to take risk, calculated risk within the right context to ensure people don't lose their money, of course. But we cannot be so risk averse that we pull the region back and it be straight. I mentioned 17% of intra-CARICOM trade. I forgot to mention that stat compared to Europe. Europe is 70%. So clearly, from a trading point of view, the European Union, the system is working for them. It is not so much working for us, and it is not, as I started off by saying, just a question of payments. There are other systemic problems that we have beyond moving money. We have moving data. We have moving people. In fact, it is a huge problem in the region, and these are challenges that we need to address. From our point of view, our mandate is technology, and we're interested in it from that point of view. The network that we have, our interface with ministers with responsibility for technology, access to them, and building awareness as well, because they would need to be a part of the discussion. Thank you.
No, just to add 2 cents, and in relation to, I do agree with your comments in terms of getting others involved. However, what we've constantly do in the region, I think sometimes we start up really with a great idea, and then the number of persons that get involved tends to belabor the point, basically create a lag in terms of a slowdown in terms of the process. We don't really want that. So I don't know if you can add some insight, well, not now, but basically identify agencies you think should lead the process, because private sector, when government issues or laws are involved, can't lead the process. So you need someone who will act fast and so on, and getting these things done, because we are here now, as you said, and we need to take risks. We need these things to be done. As it relates to the CARICOM, I don't have a problem with the level of CARICOM trade per se. I do have a problem with the stagnation of trade activity in terms of we haven't really gone from that 17% over many years, right? So we've been fluctuating around there for a number of years, and that is the problem for me, the stagnation that exists around the level of trade, and this could probably solve some of that or actually help to increase trade performance. But 70% is a little far-reaching.
Definitely. Dr. Schroeder, go ahead, please.
I think, Dr. Lin, what you're posing is a really interesting question. Bring innovation to society, who plays which role? So, and I think the role we play at CARICOM at the moment is we're pushing forward. We're trying to show the first steps how a thing can look like. And you're completely right. We will not be able to spearhead this across the whole region. Just being it, CARICOM, a startup doing it. That's what Dr. Bindeval pointed out. This is something we want to have several building blocks. One is building networks, setting up governance structures. That's Rodney and I had a lot of conversations on CARICOM before we decided to become a member. This is part of our strategy to be part of the Caribbean. It's not only being a member, it's nice, sure, we learn a lot from CTU. So, and I think the bigger the important becomes, the bigger the participation in the governance authority will come as well. In the beginning, it's where we just be a few institutions, and those show how this thing may work. And then we take the next step and see who's the next one. And I think that's the way we can build things like that. And that's, Gary read out my CV. So that's why I'm building big initiatives with a lot of groups of stakeholders. And that's why I'm in this project. Gabriel Abed asked me whether I would like to do something like this. And I said yes, because it's a societal project. I know how to build stakeholder networks. I'm not the tech guy. I know how blockchain works and all this stuff, but I like to do this big governance-based things where society takes responsibility for itself. And I think this is a huge opportunity to have quick wins as well. That makes it interesting. You don't have to change the whole Caribbean world. You just do trade and then show the first container being paid by Carib dollar. This would change a lot. I'm sure about that.
Indeed, certainly if Carib dollar is a success, it can certainly transform not necessarily just trade, but I think again deepening the integration of the region, and certainly probably also what Dr. Allen was saying about just increasing the volume of trade. Granted that to me there are other issues that need to be addressed, which are beyond technology and what a complementary currency can do. Just going back to now as a question that we have had. I don't know, Dr. Schroeder, if you're aware of the WeCoin settlement network. Someone was just asking, therefore, what would be the difference between the Carib dollar and, I guess, WeCoin, or the Carib dollar framework and the WeCoin network?
As far as I'm informed, WeCoin aims specifically at transferring money from the Caribbean to Africa. At least this is what I've read. So it's a different and very big regional outreach, and it's a purely private sector initiative. So in technology-wise, there may be some similarities, but I think if you look at governance and the way things are set up, there are the differences. But I'm no expert in WePay, then we should invite the guys from there. I think it's not fair to talk about them and without having in-depth knowledge.
Fair enough, fair enough. Also, Keller Ray Miles asks, outside of trade activities, can the Carib dollar be used to process personal individual transactions across regional currencies?
In generally speaking, from a technical side, yes. What we'll be setting up at the moment is we'll focus on B2B, so the access will be primarily for businesses, and only they will have access to these wallets. And I think we'll have to keep this focus to really foster trade, to keep our promises here. We had this discussion in the beginning, should we go to consumers directly? And we said, no, we'll focus on the B2B case and make this a success, because this is another thing, how to kill a startup, make the ideas too big, then you get lost between all the user groups because they have a lot of different interests. A business needs completely different things than a private family sending money back and forth between the Caribbean or even doing remittances.
Great. And certainly, again, it's all about pacing. We have to at least certainly test the concept first. And ensure though that is well established, and then certainly if you're going to go through mass market, then you start to deal with all sorts of permutations and challenges that you cannot envisage at this point in time. So I certainly agree that a phased approach is probably the best way. We also have a question about privacy features. I know that you had mentioned that the cybersecurity frameworks have been developed or is in the process of being developed, but what in terms of privacy around the currency? Because I think there's a concern by Dwayne Hill about how do participants avoid leaking trade arrangements due to blockchain analysis? Is blockchain going to be the underpinnings of the Carib dollar too?
Yes, we'll use distributed ledger technology. So it's a little bit different from blockchain, but I will not go into the details there. We will be using a public ledger, but public not in the sense that everybody can set up his own wallet and just get in there. If you set up your wallet, you will have to go through KYC provided by the payment service providers. And there will be no place in the system where you can say this account belongs to this or that entity. So there's privacy to a rather high extent. And yes, on the technological side, and privacy will be provided through the legal constraints in using the Carib dollar as well.
Thank you so much. There's a question I've been looking at. I'm not sure to whom to ask it. I'll probably ask Dr. Bindawal whether or not that may be something I don't know. And I assume that is with regard to something like the Carib dollar, but it has to do with fractional reserve banking, and I know absolutely nothing about that. I don't know whether or not that is something that is used or applied with regard to complementary currencies.
Yes, that question would apply. So fractional reserve banking describes, well, it's a theory to describe how commercial banks can issue more money based on the central bank reserves that they hold. So you have $10 from the central bank and you can issue, say, $100 to your clients or create more money on top of those dollars that you hold. It is a story about how conventional money works. There's with implications, or often the story comes with implications and assumptions and judgment, if you like. So applying these terms that are used on conventional money from commercial banks to a complementary currency sometimes helps people to elucidate how the complementary currency works, but often also takes their understanding and their perceptions away from what is actually important. I'm not 100% sure how, if the process of backing CARICOM is already set in stone. Like if this person asked about fractional reserve banking, it would be probably meant any move away from a one-to-one backing. So you make a transfer of in worth $1 and the assumption is that there is $1 somewhere set aside. So in case that falls through or wants to be exchanged back, the US dollar is always there. There's many ways how to do it differently without actually putting a risk on the system or the individual users, which would in conventional terms mean fractional reserve banking, but all the implications and the assumption that go with this would not apply to a complementary currency. So these questions are always really hard to answer, and you really have to look into the technical details of the individual issuance mechanism. And particularly in the B2B sphere, there's many currencies that are as good as the unit of conventional currency in use. I mentioned the Sardex in Italy, for example, but you can never exchange the unit back. So there's peripheral rules around why it's safe for businesses to use these units then instead of using the euros. But on the other hand, it's also just beneficial to use them because there are no euros to be used. On the island of Sardinia, that was exactly the problem because of the euro crisis. There wasn't enough central bank money or commercial issued money called euros to go around, and they created their own currency on top of this. In a way, it's fractional because there is no euro backing to these things. On the other hand, it's fully backed because you have services by these businesses supporting the benefit of holding these units and dealing in these units. So yes, thanks for the question. I hope my answer doesn't completely confuse everything more. But that, I don't know if Jan has a simpler answer because of the way he describes the current thinking and planning around CARICOM, or if that is something to also be decided and looked at what is most beneficial to the individual businesses in these different constituencies and what the regulators actually say. If for example, CARICOM operates as something like an e-money provider in Europe, there are just regulatory requirements as to how much of conventional money you have to hold in a trusted custodian account and how much not, and that would then determine the answer to that question. So I'm passing that over to Jan, hoping that I haven't confused everybody even more.
So the answer is for the MVP and for the first phase, it will always be 100% collateralized or even more than 100%. So no problem with any regulator in the world there. Indeed, we had a question concerning if people really trust this currency, do we have to back it 100%? Wouldn't 80% be enough? But that's not a question I would answer with, yes, there will be a point of time where this is enough. This is something a governance authority will have to answer. And then, yes, we have to discuss all the things you mentioned, Leander. So is this fractional reserve banking now? What are you doing at that moment? Just remember the US dollar has zero backing. There's nothing behind it. People still believe it's Fort Knox behind it, but it isn't. It's just paper and trust. It's a lot of trust all over the world that there's value behind it, and this works. So we're quite far from that. But we have these thoughts, but we will not decide ourselves. We start fully collateralized and not put more risk into the system than needed.
Thank you so much. And thank you for reminding us about the state of the US dollar, because I think sometimes we don't always appreciate just that it's a currency that we trust, it's a currency that we're trading, but as you say, it's not really backed by anything as much as we may think that it is. We have a question in the Q&A as well, and this one I had hoped that the person might have put to where they're from, because they say Philip Belgrave Herbert talks about he owns and runs sugarcane plantations across the Caribbean region, and he thus wants to know whether or not how would CARICOM have what potential does CARICOM have with regard to being beneficial to his business and his subsidiaries. And I guess, Dr. Schroeder, let's start with that for you. And then Dr. Aline, he was asking as well, what might be the beneficial role the Carib dollar could play for his business from an economic perspective?
Well, if you want to sell your sugar cane around the corner, you don't need Carib dollar. If you want to sell your sugar cane across the Caribbean, then Carib dollar is very beneficial because it's there all the time. You can use it 7/24. It's cheaper than the correspondent banking system you use at the moment to do transfers, because, for example, if you sell your sugar cane from Jamaica to Barbados, you first the Barbadian buyer has to transfer its Barbadian dollars to US dollars going through a correspondent bank, and then the US dollar goes back to Jamaican dollar, or you have your USD account yourself. Those are all quite complicated, time consuming and expensive. So you have something like 5 to 7% of transfer costs, especially for smaller businesses. This is the numbers we got when asking business what the cost they have. So it will be cheaper, even faster, and working 24/7. So that's the promises of this currency.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Aline?
Well, from an economic perspective, broadly speaking, we can say, well, business getting involved in such an activity really reduces the level of what we call it, that leaky bucket initiative discussion where we talk about if our funds leaking up by exporting goods and operating with at a cost using the US dollar and so on. So that reduces all of that. So it keeps a lot of the income within the community, the regional community in itself. It encourages further development in terms of further trade. So you actually, and cross collaboration, whereas I don't know if Dr. Schroeder will actually provide a database with the other companies that facilitate the Carib coin that would give you also another insight into who produces what regionally, because a lot of times we go online and we search for producers and we come up with persons from Panama and from the US, but we have producers right here at home, right? Even sometimes in our own country. So rather than having to do all of that and face exporting our currency abroad or having to pay our funds abroad, we can actually facilitate a greater development within the region from having this initiative at a successful rate. Yeah.
Indeed. And if Carib dollar works well, I think there's a very sort of practical experience that has happened across the region from time to time, whereby businesses need to pay for goods and services, whether or not across the region or outside the region, and they need to purchase US dollars. And you have a bill from your supplier for 50,000, 100,000 US dollars. You go to the bank, the money, at least in local currency, is sitting in your account. You need to buy, make a wire transfer. The bank is telling you they don't have enough cash, US dollars, for you to complete the transaction. So you may find that over a period of days, weeks, you have to be either trying to make, like little payments to facilitate or buying the foreign exchange, holding it until you have the amount that you need. So you may find, and I've had that experience firsthand in terms of trying to buy something locally here in Jamaica. The person from whom I'm buying it needs to purchase it overseas. And for weeks, the banks didn't have enough money. There was some sort of quota on how much foreign exchange could be purchased. And this could, significantly be alleviated. I would think that if you have a Carib dollar, that at least you as soon as you and your supplier agree and everybody is happy in terms of the details of the transaction, the transfers can be done, I would assume in a relatively short space of time. And business can clip along at a faster pace than probably what actually happens right now across the region. So that may be something to consider. Dr. Schroeder, I'll just let you at least make any sort of point on my comments, and then we'll probably just take our last question and call it a day, because we're getting quickly up to time.
Just a quick addition to Michelle, your point. The cost goes beyond just the conversion of the US dollar, because even just to transfer a loan from one country to another requires a further payment. So I expect that with a successful approach to this initiative, if it comes to fruition, that there should be some significant reduction in transactional costs going forward. That's the expectations. Apologies.
No problem. Go ahead, Dr. Schroeder.
No, definitely. I think, Michelle, you perfectly described how in real life it feels if there are US dollar liquidity drenches. This is exactly what happens. You have to wait days, sometimes weeks, and the smaller the company is, the longer they wait. That's what we've learned. Sometimes it takes them 3 weeks to really get the US dollar to do their payment. And well, this slows down the economy, and at the end you waste your time with stuff which is not your business, but running up to your bank. Even that you don't have to do, it's in your laptop.
Indeed. And just our final question, and it is from Selby Wilson. What are the barriers to moving forward? And I think that could be just in terms of CARICOM, but I think we can also speak about it from the CSME element, because Dr. Allen had mentioned as probably one of his key points of focus is the whole issue of buy-in, whether or not we can get people on board to make this a success. However, Dr. Schroeder, I will let you speak first. Just give us your sense as to what might be some of the barriers moving forward, Dr. Allen, and then SG, if you want to just throw in any insights thereafter, and we'll at least call this a close for me.
I wouldn't say getting buy-in is a barrier. It's a challenge we have to deal with. We have to find the right pathways. And as Leander showed in the beginning, it's if we do it the right way, not trying to buy the buy-in, throwing money into media, doing big campaigns, but rather doing it the way we're doing it at the moment, building up momentum, getting people behind this Carib dollar, getting them excited. I think then we don't have real barriers. We have this just needs some time. So time is money in business. So that may become a barrier if we don't find investors at some point, but maybe some others will get behind that. So I'm not used to think about barriers. I'm just used to think about where's the right pathway to go. And this is what I learned from each of these webinars. Looking at other pathways, maybe it's Initiative 25 for 25 bringing us forward now after the discussion we've had here. Would be very welcome to go that pathway.
Dr. Allen, what about the barriers going forward? What do you see?
Well, let me piggyback on Dr. Schroeder's. I'll try not to overstep here. I'll change my wording to say the current strength of regional and community involvement is a barrier. The current level of it existing is a barrier. So I'll leave it there. And I think definitely cost is a barrier. So we have to be wary of that. And remember, at the end of all of this, payments may be one thing, but the payment costs do arise when we start speaking of transportation from one island to another. So that becomes a problem and needs to be considered at some point as well.
Well, definitely. So some of these are issues outside of.
Yeah, exactly. So because even though
yeah.
you may reduce the cost of payment, the overall cost may still be high due to overall transportation costs and other administrative duties. So
Indeed.
This is only one element, and I do applaud CARICOM for its initiative going forward, but we have a number of other things we need to take care of, and this is only one being eliminated if it comes to a successful outcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, SG.
Sure, thank you. And I can see we're out of time. Very engaging discussion. From where we sit, I would reiterate, we are not financial services regulators. We are not even telecoms regulators, but we do advise on regulatory policy. And we do acknowledge the cross-cutting nature of technology. So in this case, interaction with financial services, but it interacts across all sectors. Security, of course, a big discussion on artificial intelligence. So for our role, it's pivotal. We want to be a part of this and to see the success of the project, while at the same time encouraging other critical stakeholders to be a part of it and ensure that we address these systemic problems that we have in the Caribbean, and we're not just talking about them 10 years from now. So on that note, I want to thank you for moderating, and I guess you will have the final word as you close us off. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, on behalf of the CTU.
Yes, and thank you again for joining us. This, I think, has just been a very riveting conversation, and I think we have so many issues that we probably as a region need to resolve. We have CSME, we have regional integration. We've been talking about it for so long. And really, I think, as I think Dr. Schroeder had just briefly mentioned it in passing, it's time, I think, for us to put our money where our mouth is and do something that is really going to move the needle and make the region more economically viable, deepen the integration across the region, deepen the trade relationships between our countries, because it is unfortunate that trade across the region is such a small proportion of the overall trade and importations and exports that we do. So, thank you so much for joining us today. And let's continue to look at what is happening with Carib coin and Carib dollar and be part of the conversation moving forward, because there is much to learn. We do have an opportunity to shape the frameworks going forward and make it something that we as a region, where we really punch above our weight, can be proud of. So thank you very much.
The next time.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks for joining us, to all of our online participants.